Welcome to New York Bio's Virtual Breakfast Series, a digital program started in 2020 bringing you fireside chats with leaders across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Luke Rosen, co-founder of KIF1A.org.
Morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Hawks Bland, and I am the CEO at New York Bio. We are thrilled you're joining us for another edition of our virtual breakfast series. Today, we have a very special guest. He's always special, but he's especially special today because this is Rare Disease Day. And it's also the 40th anniversary this year of the Orphan Drug Act. So we've got a lot of things to talk about with Luke about his own family's journey, as well as the work he's done in the industry. And he is also an actor. So I think this conversation
Former
can go
actor.
into a former actor. He's a retired actor. And we can go in a lot of different ways. With that, as always, please ask your questions in the chat or the Q&A during the course of our conversation with Luke, and we will be sure to try and get to those. With that, I'll turn it over to Derek to kick us off.
All right. Well, I seem to say this every week, but I'm super excited to have Luke here as our guest. Luke is somebody who we've known for a long time, and honestly, is somebody who's been on our wish list to have as a guest for a long time. I think a lot about the people that drive our industry forward, and in a lot of ways, Luke is at the top of the list when I think of people who are kind of dedicated to patient advancement and who walk the walk better than just about anybody I've met in the industry. So, Luke, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here. It's fantastic to have you on. And we're going to get into some good stuff. So why don't you start with a little bit of an origin story, and we'll kick off from there. I know you've done this a couple of times, so the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I've done it a couple of times, but everyone's seems different every conversation, especially with you guys. And what an incredible introduction. So it's an honor to be here, and thanks for having me. I'm such a huge fan of everything New York Bio does, including this series. So thanks for having me, especially on this Rare Disease Day, which is something to both celebrate and also to kind of realign focus for the entire community. I think that every year and with new advancements comes a new opportunity to focus on how we can move forward and make more progress. So thanks. How this all started for me is, like Derek said, I was, and Jen said, I was an actor for 25 years. And then our second child, Susanna, at the time, we knew something was happening with her health. She was 2, and she was having a lot of seizures, having trouble walking, and something just was off. And so we, pursued every medical avenue we could, and finally came to the diagnosis that she had a mutation in her KIF1A gene. And she was one of maybe 12 in the world that we could find, primarily in literature. And we knew that the disease was a degenerative one, and that with a progressive course, and things would likely our lives changed that morning when we found that out. And I was I'll never forget several moments from that sequence, but I was certainly a day or two after sitting in my trailer on a TV show called Orange Is the New Black, and I thought to myself, there's something I can be doing that's far more impactful than a beer commercial at Super Bowl. And also, of course, to help my daughter and the few kids like her that at the time we could find, which really were none. Such a small group that were scattered all over the world, and some that were in literature that had already died, and it was just very hard to find anybody. And so I spoke with our physician, who's now our champion, and our who was really, she calls herself our community Sherpa, but she's really far more than Sherpa, because I say this a lot, it's not just helping us guide up a mountain, but it's when we fall, she picks us up and makes sure we get up there. But Wendy Chung over at Columbia, where Derek works, when she told us that there's no treatment or no cure yet, I said, well, how can that be? What do we have to do? And she very clearly told us, go find 100 kids. And so I thought those are great marching orders. How do we do that?
Yeah.
Well, the picture, and that's when we started the foundation, kif1a.org. My wife and I did, and set out to do just that, and ended up evolving into more of a research focused and community driven group.
How did you even, because I feel like a common theme in a very uncommon situation is the journey of getting to the point where you start the foundation, right? So it's like, how do you even start the process of looking for other patients or others affected?
Yeah.
Is it on the internet? Is it through physician networks? Like, what was that path like?
Yeah, that's such an important question. And I think there are two parts to it, right? There's how do you start it and how do you maintain it? Because right now we're at a precipice or a turning point. There's a paradigm shift happening with a lot of different foundations, right now, and we're navigating that. But how we started it really was, and this is a story that or a moment that if people have heard me, talk about this in the past, it's something that is really important to hear more than once. So if I'm repeating myself, forgive me, but don't forgive me. One of the first people we saw, we didn't set out to start a foundation. We set out to go find people. And, I found a parent contacted me and said, and I forget, and how he got through us was through, I think, ClinVar or one of those databases that lists mutations. And he said, my daughter has the same mutation, or we were just diagnosed with mutation KIF1A. And I said, well, have you read the one or two clinical papers that are out there about it? Because there really was one or two clinical papers, a lot of research papers, but the clinical papers were terrifying. I mean, the titles to those papers, were KIF1A causes brain atrophy and sudden death. They were horrifically scary. And then when I asked him that, he said, no, I couldn't afford the $35 on PubMed. That to me was a horrific injustice, because everybody has the right to learn about their own disease, right? And more than the right, but at least the opportunity to learn about that disease. So the first thing we did is completely, and I say this a lot, this is the first two actions of the foundation. The start was breaking the law and ordering a pizza, right? So we moved forward and paid for and uploaded all the PDFs of every paper without permission onto a website. So I got the domain kif1a.org and thought, I'll put all of the papers on here for anybody interested. I'll put my phone number at the bottom, which it was great, and I'll also put please contact us, and then sent it to every hospital or company with a neuroscience department. And had the two biggest keys to our beginning were genetic counselors and social workers to spread the word, and organizations like Global Genes and especially the Mighty. I don't know if you know the Mighty, Mike Porath's platform. It has more visitors than WebMD. It's a place where people can share their stories, and it's wonderful. It's called the Mighty, and it's amazing. If you want to read stories from patients, from community members, check out the Mighty. And so I wrote a story then and submitted it to the Mighty, and it was about the need for next generation testing. And there was a lab in South Korea who got back to us, and he said, what do you need? And I said, I need 500 whole exome sequencing tests for free. And at that time, this was 7 years ago. God, 7 years ago. And it costs a lot of money. So he said, I can give you 2. And I said, all right, I need 5, And so we just started making sure that, these tests were available to kids who needed them. And that's really how we started to do it. And then we went to every genetic testing company, like the wonderful people at GeneDx, wonderful people at Invitae, the wonderful, which is now different company, the incredible people at, just multiple different, Ambry, and we went to every single company that does genetic testing and made sure KIF1A was on their panels.
Right.
The kid came in to the doctor and said, a big part of our disease is optic nerve atrophy. And so our kids slowly go blind. And, if a kid came into a doctor's and said, my son is having, or my daughter's having trouble seeing, if it's a savvy enough physician, they'll order a vision panel. So we want to make sure that KIF1A is on a vision panel, a seizure panel, movement disorder panel. So
all the way across the presentation areas. Yeah.
Right. If you were going to find some, if it was there, you were going to find it.
Right. So that helped a lot. And this was all with the guidance of the folks, in Wendy Chung's lab. I can't imagine not having the guidance of Dr. Chung and her lab, because they didn't just have the task of treating my daughter and just the one or two other kids who were in the tri-state area at the time, but educating us, right? And taking the time to answer what I now see as simple biology questions. And then, cut to 5 or 6 years later, integrating the team at NewYorkBIOs, who we'll talk about, I hope, soon, right?
Yeah.
To really, start this whole movement of educating families. So the decisions, not just medical decisions, but, how to focus research, because as we all know, it's really, patient communities right now are driving research for their own rare diseases. And, the Chan Zuckerberg initiative, and then, so Lauren, the Chan Zuckerberg initiative, Wendy's team at Columbia, all of our research network members, our science team at KIF1A.org, the patient population just kept growing and growing and growing. So it was like this orchestra that just needed to work in harmony together. And so that's where we are now, I think.
Well, I mean, you're bringing up this huge point, and unfortunately, not everybody gets a Wendy Chung, right? I mean, a big part of the thing that leaves people stranded is when either their physician doesn't know for lack of anything else, or they go from doctor to doctor trying to find answers, and they don't get them. So there's the incredible importance of kind of raising that bar for almost the entire medical industry of, can we make sure that people do get the right tests? Can we make sure that when things come out, they're included in these panels, right? So it's really something that kind of hits on almost every facet of healthcare, whether it's a biotech company exploring new biology, whether it's a genetics company trying to keep up with the pace of everything else. We kind of need all of those things firing on all cylinders to keep making progress. Right. And I think the thing that's going to come back over and over today is that one of the biggest things is that patient communities like what you've built have now started to play this, I won't say outsized, I think right-sized role in making sure things move forward, forward in an equitable way, and changing where they have to. I think we're going to get into this later, but our entire regulatory system was not built for this, right? We were built on, the way that we used to develop drugs, and now we have to change some things. And now I think we have the power to do that, and it's all because of folks like you who are moving things in the right direction. So, why don't we pull back a little bit? So let's talk a little bit about KIF1A.org, and let's talk about the interplay between those organizations and the biotech industry, right? So tell us a little bit about KIF1A.org, and then let's talk about the interplay between how you actually help get drugs developed.
That's great. Thanks, Derek. Yeah, I think first I'll say that it's humbling to say that the organization that I started, and ordinarily I'm first to take credit about things, but not in this case. I can't. It's really
that I don't believe, Luke. I absolutely do not believe that about you. So
well, it really is. I mean, I can't tell you the the amount of, it was kind of, maybe I'm the loudest one, or one of the loudest ones, but it really was an entire community of people. There was, you just kind of have to, put it out there and give a phone number. And then all of a sudden, when people start coming together, every single member of our community, everyone has a skill set that can work for the organization. And so, it's a machine that's driven by so many different people. And those leaders are both, scientific leaders who, by the way, when people say the patient community, or the community now is more, and this has happened, I've really noticed has become, and it's always been true for us. When you say the community, everyone on here is the community, the patient community. It's the scientific community, it's the R&D community, it's the patients, the caregivers, the parent. The community isn't just the patient community, right? And that's where things are changing. So KIF1A.org started and grew and grew and grew. We were fortunate enough to get 2 grants early on, which was PCORI, Patient Centered, right? So everyone knows about PCORI, and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Rare is one, which is, was game changing, allowed me to initially connect. They had invited me kindly out to Aspen, Colorado, to tell our story in front of a lot of people, and that's where I first met Brian Wallach from IMALS, who is just a remarkable. I mean, that could be a whole.
He's just an amazing human.
Yeah.
I
So,
mean, there's a movie coming out.
It's out. It's out.
It's out now.
Yeah. There was just a screening of it in San Francisco that I couldn't make because Susanna wasn't well, but it was it also had a video from the Rares 1 cohort, which is a couple of and big shout out to the Test Research Foundation, Kim Nye, and whose video was on there with KIF1A.org. So it was I also, the most important meeting being out there that Tanya and Heidi and Andra and all the folks from CZI, when they had me out there, I got to meet for the first time Turner. Turner is he's now a young man, but I could say he's a boy, one of the first boys that was part of our community. His family's amazing. And his mother Jenny and grandmother came to the Aspen Ideas presentation we're doing. And the thing that I am definitely going to cry during this next however year, but they live in Colorado, and so of all of the wonderful connections I was making there, I got to meet Turner one-on-one, and Jenny and Turner and his grandmother, and they're rolled Turner in his wheelchair, and I thought, my gosh, there's somebody like Susanna here, and it's all over the world. It's in Colorado, and so I'm forever thankful to CZI for a lot of things, but the most important thing I'm thankful to CZI for was giving me the opportunity to hug Turner, which I had that opportunity to do in Colorado, and will more. I know it in the future. And also, one of the grants that we got, we were able to take our organization to the next level and hire a chief science officer. So that changed everything for KIF1A.org. I at the time could barely get through describing KIF1A and our children without either crying or bumbling on for half an hour. And then we had, we identified through storytelling and through social media, identified Dominique Lessard, Dr. Dominique Lessard, who's an incredible researcher, scientist, person, SciComms. And she reached out, she spoke at our conference that PCORI helped us with. And she was one of a handful of people that were studying KIF1A in a clinically relevant way. So we were immediately able to hire her, which changed everything for us, brought us to a new level. Yeah.
And she was already, I mean, she was already looking at it, right, through her academic lens.
Right. So
Yeah.
yes, she had published. She was already looking at KIF1A, and I remember I wrote a story about Susanna and posted it. Dominique read it and got in touch with us right away. And she was at UVM with the Chris Berger Lab, who are also incredible people, and they just engaged with us. And right away we were. It was kismet. I mean, Dominique. There was no hesitation. It didn't take too much convincing to get one of a handful of people in the world that was working on this specific gene to join our mission. And through her, we reached out and found people like Shinsuke in Japan, and the UC Davis folks. They're just Rick McKinney, all these people who had something to do with KIF1A in the research realm, and then all of a sudden realized that, my gosh, the work that I'm doing is going to help people, because there are people affected by this. And Kristen Verhey, I could go on and on. If you just go to our website and look at our research network, it's incredible. And we met other physicians like Jennifer Bain at Columbia, who is incredible and is currently with Wendy running Susanna's clinical trials.
So
one thing
go ahead,
I want to,
Jennifer.
I was just going to say one thing that I didn't want to interrupt you earlier. And first of all, I knew I came prepared, Luke, because I have talked to you before, and I came prepared with, I cry at commercials. So today was like, I just came prepared with tissues. But the other thing is, it's interesting to me, and something you said about the connectedness, right, of the patient community with R&D companies. And I work really hard when we talk about New York Bio and the things we do, right? So we're hosting our 3rd annual patient engagement summit, March 21. And so we've made it a point not only to do patient related things, like you said, but to weave it into everything. So when I talk about our community at New York Bio, patients are absolutely right there with the R&D companies, right, that we work with. So I just wanted to bring that sort of point home before we lost it for everybody, that it really is an interconnected. We can't, look, we do it for you on the R&D side, and you all help us to do better and to get better at helping patients.
Well, that point is a huge point. And I, was fortunate enough to work in biotech for 5 or 6 years. And I was just having a conversation with my dear friend, Sophia Cacciatore, you guys know, who's just
We know and love Sophia.
Sophia.
And we were just having a conversation that, at the end of the day, we can't be naive, right? Biotech and the biopharmaceutical companies exist. They're companies that and there needs to be, look, my ethos, and when I was working in biotech and when I'm very passionate about staying in the biotech world soon after we move forward a little bit with KIF1A, is that, look, no company, no treatment. Simple as that in many ways, right? And so, also the patient communities, and I have no problem saying this, move the market, right? Even the rare disease communities, right? Move the market. And so if there's a responsible company out there who has is really truly integrating the patient community and caregiver community's voice into everything they do, from and this is Hans Christinger, who is my mentor, really took me under his wing in so many ways, is a person who I work closely with in many ways. It was on board of KIF1A.org, and is just that's how I kind of.
And it's the chair of the New York Bio board now.
Yes, and of course now is the setting to say that. But Hans has been somebody who really, if I were to say, do I have a mentor in all of this, Hans is that person for me. And it is also, if we are able to integrate that patient perspective and that journey through, and I hate when people say patient journey, I hate when people say, it does sound like a vernacular that's become tokenism in a way, but the life cycle of a treatment or a product, which we have to be we can't be
Yeah.
naive, right? Is if you're integrating that personal experience from all the way from business development and preclinical through and business decisions, right? There needs to be a chief patient officer at every company, right? To have that go through the entire every business decision should be made with that in mind. Every you can and talking to the preclinical teams, great preclinical teams at Ovid, Pat Sarmier and Noel, I mean, just these wonderful people who you're trying to identify what target and what, population of people this potential and hopeful treatment might work for. You have to talk to the preclinical people and then all the way through protocol design, et cetera, to the very end. And I think that doesn't really happen. It doesn't really happen often enough. And it's very rare. I can name maybe 3 or 5 companies that are really, really, truly doing it. And I think that it just back to your point, as elevating, biotech to be able to harness and collaborate and work in parallel with the community. It's also becoming the families and the patient community's job to elevate and the medical community's job. What you say, there's Wendy Chung, and what she has done is you elevate, you raise the bar, right? You elevate and give a platform for other physicians, other scientists to work for, and that's something that families can certainly do too.
So I had an amalgamation of a question, which the first part of it was, where are the areas that you think either side, whether it's the foundation side or biotech side, could quote unquote do more, right? And I think you kind of just hit on it a little bit with the level of kind of connectivity and breaking silos and things, which is also kind of a tired expression. But what are some of the other things that you think companies could be better at? And after we get there, I want to get to the stuff that we are getting better at, which I think there's a bunch of things we could talk about.
Yeah. No, I do too. I think the answer is always, and unfortunately it comes down to funding and financing, right? And money, but also in kind work. And I think that, a currency that is exponentially more valuable than $1 is often, a CRO or a researcher or somebody coming and saying, look, the Coriell Institute does this for us, Deb Requiens and Dan Lavery, and, said, what we can do is we can store your cell lines here. And we can keep your cell lines, we can industrialize your cell lines. The Jackson Laboratory, we can industrialize your model systems and things like that, which is millions and millions of dollars, right? And that's incredible. That's incredible. But it really, unfortunately, I think it does come down to, do we, and I hope we do get to talk about Enlorum, because it really does come down to, are people willing to take a risk? And when you say take a risk, you really got to think about it, because there are different models that have been set up by people with years and years of experience, and we have to trust those leaders and say, yeah, I'll take a risk on this. And I think that where families foundations can do this is, you really got to find the people you trust. I know a lot of stories about different biotech companies, and I always am happy to talk to any new families and be very open and honest about, here's who you need to be aware of, and here's who you need to collaborate with. And if you find those people you trust, and we were fortunate to find them right away, because, it was right around the corner at Columbia, and where, our children were born, and where, when I fell off my bike, I got my arm fixed and my son passed it, so we're fortunate there. But you have to find the people you trust, and you have to unrestrict your resources. Right. So too many times will families, I think this is different between, degenerative diseases, that there's no one disease is more profound than the other, but there is an urgency that exists a little bit when there's a ticking clock. And if we're trying to stop that clock, I think, if you create an entire, contract of deliverables that, if a nonprofit foundation is working with a lab, then that lab has to, can't pivot and be creative and try new things, which is what we need to do, is try new things. So you need to have that trust to unrestrict your funding of a lab as an organization, to be able to say, this is a donation. The goal of it is to, identify, discover, and hopefully develop treatment for KIF1A or whatever disease. Please use your talents and your skills. It's a Godfather line, but whatever you can do to make this happen. So we need to be a little less restrictive. We need to take the leash off and let people work.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go to n-Lorem then. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on n-Lorem? Let's dig in.
So n-Lorem is just, it's hard to capture in words what n-Lorem has done for our family and what it's setting out to do for an entire community. n-Lorem, their mission really is to leave no person behind, right? And so where, there's such small communities that will certainly not fit into a company's pipeline, they're making very specific antisense oligonucleotides that are mutation specific. And now you can have a disease that affects, thousands of people, but it's a mutation specific. You think about the mutation that it has 5-10 people on it. In Susanna's case, not that. And, and hopefully that, ASO might be able to help a few folks, but then there's also an opportunity to, scale that to multiple different mutations across the rare disease landscape. But it needs resources, right? I mean, you can't do that without resources. So I do think this model it's been developed by people who have cured diseases. I mean, built Spinraza, and SMA, and are able 30 years plus years of experience. And Stan Crook, who's this amazing person, could have done anything with his retirement, but decided to do this. And this has been a game changer. It is hard to be in a clinical trial, I'll tell you that, but we were fortunate enough to be the first, I believe one of the first, and more, Susanna was one of the first folks treated. And there's a big difference between an experimental drug and a personalized medicine, right? So we're really going into this with, it's all figuring out new things at the same time. Hopefully the regulatory system, the FDA, has been amazing at, recognizing the urgency and the need and the power of what n-Lorem is setting up and what other folks are doing. And I think that you have this proven record of a company who has optimized and made, the ASOs that are almost incomparable to, any other company endeavoring to do that. And so you really trust as a family that, okay, if you're going to do this, these are the people who are going to do it. And we're fortunate enough to be, and then the high ethical and scientific, everybody's blinded going into it. It's an incredible process that they've crafted, and something that needs to be scaled. And we as a community can come together to figure out a way, not just the biotech industry, but, I can't imagine who would say no to helping this mission, right? Certainly our child and other KIF1A kids and other nano rare kids would not have, and people, not just kids, would not have this opportunity if everyone didn't galvanize together of communities. So it's changed our lives. We're in the middle of a clinical trial, and our goal is, clinical trials are hard, to be able to make it so the next friend of Susanna's with KIF1A has a smooth process. So that's something we're hoping for.
I think the biggest shift, and I don't really know who to credit this to, but I think there is a larger groundswell of moving away from "you can't do that" to "yeah, we can do that."
Absolutely.
Right. And I think, there's a lot here. I think your ability to take in a chief scientific officer who, previously, no, they're going to go rise up the ranks in academia, or they're going to go to biotech. Right. But there are people who are willing to say, yeah, I'm going to dedicate my time to this because this is important. Right. And you think about clinical trials, a decade ago, one person in a clinical trial, you can't do that. And all of this groundswell has led to, yeah, you can do that because this is going to be the best thing for these patients, right? And I think in particular, clinical trials is one of the biggest places that we've innovated, because we realized that without being able to get anything through the FDA, like you said, there's no end game, right? You can't do this, once. If you ever hope to get anything to other kids, it's got to go through the FDA. It's got to actually go through that process. And the process was not built for this, right? The process was built for ages ago for a small molecule to go to 30,000 people with heart disease. And this is not that. So let's talk a little bit about how that's changed, because we mentioned Ethan Perlstein before while we were chatting. But let's talk about N of 1 and 1 to N.
Yeah, there are two. I try to figure out what 1 of N means. I get it, right? It's something that's going to scale for a specific community, right? And
right.
I think
you kind of start with one kid, with
yeah.
One kid with one repurposed treatment, and then you scale that clinically afterwards.
I think it comes down to modality, right? And Ethan's an innovative. We do have we're cut from the same cloth in that we're very provocative, and I say sometimes my iron fist lacks a velvet glove, and but I think that really does work for small molecule approach, right? But when you're talking about a specific mutation and allele specific approach, it's less of a shotgun approach and more of a sniper approach, right?
Yeah.
So it is an N of 1 that the process is scalable, and the ASOs hopefully can work for a few, but the process can be scaled, and the process can be industrialized, and the process can be accelerated, right? And a small molecule approach might be and we're working on these at kif1a.org is working, as Hans would say, non-sequentially in many different modalities, right? Yeah. And then that's really important. So I think there's merit to both, certainly both endeavors, that sniper approach and that shotgun approach, but also what you said about showing something that with the regulatory authorities. I think it's more John Crowley, who's one of my, just is an amazing leader, right? John and Jane at Amicus, they have a rule, right? Is that not one FDA engagement happens without a caregiver or patient there. Yeah. If you're talking about toxicology, or if you're talking about why we should pull it across the finish line and approve it, like all the and that to me is critical, because if you're at a pre-IND meeting or something, and the FDA is so open, it is an incredible agency, because if they can see, and it has to be clinically meaningful, if you can see that this is going to make a difference for us, for our kid, if this is going to be the difference between 10 seizures a day and 100 seizures a day, or
right,
5 new steps, that is huge. And FDA more and more, in my experience, working closely with folks like Anwarm and Dr. Chung and all these folks, and the patients and the caregivers are realizing that this is clinically meaningful, and that while we might not have appropriate measures to actually capture and quantify it yet, that qualitative data is becoming more and more impactful and important to capture.
Right. Well, and I think that for many years, it was all about sort of whether it was an end biomarker or was a surrogate endpoint, right? Like it was like about the data that you found in tests, right? Yeah. And now we're talking about quality of life improvements, right? Like you said, 10 versus 100 seizures is a massive improvement. Yeah. Where it doesn't show up necessarily. You don't quantify that on blood work, right? Yeah. So it's hard. So let's take a little pause while we're thinking about FDA. And obviously FDA gets its authority from laws that Congress passes. And so we have the whole policy debate. What do you see? And I think I mentioned earlier, right? Like this is the 40th anniversary of the Orphan Drug Act, right? Which has been sort of cut back sort of recently in its impact. What do you see as far as what Washington or policymakers can do to really not just not stand in the way, but support the work of organizations like in Lorem and the ability for patients to access these treatments.
Yeah, so I mean, there's I think myriad different rabbit holes I could go down on policy, but
Too.
yep, and of course I know you can too. But the one most important thing on my mind for policy right now is I believe that there are, and don't quote me on this because one might have been added, 5 or 6 states that Medicaid covers whole exome sequencing and whole genome sequencing, and more, right? And we will realize that, look, each disease, while rare, collectively is not rare, right?
Right.
And how we're going to do that is by getting people the appropriate test to diagnose faster. And for me, from a policy perspective, the most important thing is, now I'm taking payers and things like that out of the equation right now.
Yeah.
The most important thing that we could, as a community, do is speak with our you know, the men and women of Congress and make it abundantly clear that if Medicaid can cover the appropriate genetic testing, the diagnostic yield is going to be so exponential that, you know, it's going to create something that, and I hate this term, right? But when you think about, you know, especially, you know, publicly traded, private, any biotech or biopharmaceutical company, the word market size does come into the conversation, right?
Yeah.
And we are going to be able to look, if you can have appropriate and thorough genetic testing that Medicaid covers, we're going to find, you know, KIF1A is not going to have 400 people around the world. It's, I mean, there are thousands of people walking around with KIF1A and all of these other single gene diseases that really are misdiagnosed as cerebral palsy or something else, when, you know, if we have the right testing. So for me, a policy priority for me would be getting Medicaid to cover the right tests.
Yeah. There are so many parents out there. There are so many parents out there wondering what the heck their kids have, right?
Yeah.
There, it's and the killer is that, you know, there's a good chance it could be answered with that, right? And that's, the tool is there. We're really good at sequencing stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So that's I wholeheartedly agree with you that we should be that should be first pass.
And it's complete, and it's cost effective, right? I mean, if you have the right diagnosis, you're in the hospital for a less amount of time.
Yes.
Your diagnosis happens faster. Your treatment, there's a treatment plan, hopefully, that's available. There are models that can be scaled to help you find therapeutics. So it is, we've teed it up. I mean, I think that the family organizations, and when I say we, I mean every foundation and every community has really, you know, if the goal is to de-risk things for R&D, it's also, we've de-risked it for policymakers too. And I think that it's time, you know, if you're a family member affected by a disease in any way, you know, go to your we have members of today, you know, I mean, a lot of people are on the Hill today, this week. We have KIF1A advocates, families that are going to their members of Congress and saying, look, you know, not just a constituent of yours, and you know, I have an entire fleet of people who need this service, need this, you know, need this service. Yeah.
Do you think that there are more things that can be done as part of newborn screening, or more of an option when you realize something is not right?
So yes, I think that, you know, there are initiatives that just started at Columbia with, I'm sure with Wendy at the helm, I am forgetting the an acronym it uses, but it's I'm forgetting it, but it's an initiative to group neurodevelopment diseases together, and as a newborn screening mechanism, identify those neurodevelopment diseases earlier and earlier. So I think there are things that can be done with newborn screening, certainly, that will you know, impact more than just the 4 or 5 diseases that are on the current panels.
Yeah, I mean, it means a lot from it does mean a lot from a total healthcare cost perspective, because after that time, you are then putting your costs towards something that, you know, rather than spinning your wheels trying to find something. But really just from an ethical standpoint, this is, giving caregivers and children and relatives and everybody, giving them an idea and giving them the information. It is not, we're not missing this because we lack the tools to do so.
No, and there's nothing, and I talked to Dr. Crook and the folks at NLORM a lot about this, and the communities that I meet through NLORM is and it's true, is that sometimes it's hard to articulate this with other family members and even with doctors. It is a hopeless, isolating feeling to be one of very few trying to climb a mountain, and knowing that the outcome is that the outcome currently is catastrophic and often fatal, and it's isolating, it's hopeless, it's scary, it's not healthy, it's horrible. And if we can change that, then we're doing something that is good. I can't tell you how difficult life is, and we we are it's hard to even describe.
So thank you so much to anonymous attendee who had forwarded us the link
Yes.
to the Guardian study.
The Guardian study, thank you.
Yes.
The Guardian study.
That's it, the Guardian study. Yeah.
I think if I had a multiple choice test, I could probably figure out who anonymous attendee is. But thank you very much, anonymous. That was very helpful.
Yeah, Guardian study.
All right.
So-
So you go, Jennifer.
No, I was gonna shift us a little bit because I know we have like 12 minutes left. So clearly you had 5 very important years at Ovid. So let's talk a little bit about sort of your lens from inside biotech, right?
Yeah.
So, you parent, activist, inside a company developing treatments, and you worked with, part of your remit, right, was working within the patient community. So talk to us a little bit about how that changed the way you look at things now through your lens of the KIF1A organization, but then also what you think we're getting right and what we can build on.
Yeah, I think there are definitely models out there. I talked about a few of them, certainly, NLORM and Amicus and others, and Ovid was great because I went there to learn, really. I went there to learn and really figure out a way to apply every function of biotech to a model that could come together and really not just find out what every function needs and then have the patient community do it, right? So if we can have an ecosystem set up that the only thing that's missing is an intervention, once that intervention comes into the community, we can do everything from rapidly enrolling to identifying, the right centers of excellence and clinics that can, accelerate that, not only enrollment, but our clinical trial ready, have experience, and I think that if you're able to, like I said, really integrate that, patients, not just as partners, but as the I'm forgetting the word, the linchpin, the glue that holds everything together. The minute you take that integration of the patient voice and experience is really important, out of the equation, you're going to get the wrong answer at the end of the equation, at the end of the problem, right? And I was never very good at math, growing up, but as I'm teaching my son, I would realize that math is an incredible example. Just math, regular outside math is quite literally problem that you need to solve, right? And I think I look at it like an equation, right? And if there's a missing element to that equation, you're never going to get the right answer. And the missing element every time is the patient. And so the companies that are getting it right are the companies that are integrating every single element of that experience that I just spoke about into writing protocols that are, that aren't filled with, non sequitur endpoints that really haven't been informed by, what you want, if you have a question about whether something is compliant or not, what you do? Call the FDA and ask them. It's like there's this hesitation to quickly collaborate, with that orchestra that needs to work in harmony. And I think that there are companies out there who are certainly, orchestrating in a good way. And so I think that trend is happening more and more and more. I can say that, in working at Ovid, I know that Sophia, who's still at Ovid, is an amazing resource. So reach out to Sophia. I do think that with industry as whole, now I'm talking in general, not about any one specific company, the minute that there's a corporate culture, it becomes a little bit less easy to, like I said, take the leash off the people who are involved in the company and really go out and integrate with the families and really go out and say, hey, here's an opportunity to be in a clinical trial. Like, recruitment isn't a bad word, it's let's go roll this clinical trial together because it's a hopeful treatment for somebody. So, how you do that is you go and embed yourself and visit with and speak with the families. It's an easy part of the equation.
Well, it's funny. It circles back to, what you said earlier. Like the thing that Wendy said to you was go find 100 kids, right? And it's really not, a lot of it is not that different. Like if you're going to pull together for, the mission at a biotech company and you have this rare disease, like go find 100 kids. Like these are the people, go find the people that you work for, right? You need to find those people. You need to know why you work for them and you need to talk to them, because if you don't talk to them, you make a whole bunch of assumptions. And there's a phrase about that somewhere that says it's a bad thing to do. So, you have to, the more you're integrated in that, and it's funny, this is something that we've talked about at NewYorkBIO for a few years now. I think it's probably one of the best things that we did was incorporate more and more of this in what we do. Absolutely. But, the more you actually involve yourself with the patients, I just believe that you have a much clearer path to success, because the thing that you've said over and over again is trust, right? And if there's groups that all your families are working with, you build that level of trust throughout the entire development cycle. And if you don't have it, like you said, they have no real reason to trust you or stick with you through thick and thin.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there are a few words, that I love. I love language, and, the word trust, the word impact, the word community, those are words that, are the glue to everything we do. And hope, hope is a very real thing. And we all need to be reminded, especially on days like today and weeks like this is actually the first rare disease day that we've actually been able to we've been in a hospital for every rare disease day randomly, right? And just so happened, but hope is a very real thing. And those words are words that, NewYorkBIO, you guys are doing an incredible, I've sat down to dinner with you guys and know that, it's about being solution oriented. And so there are definitely companies who are out there doing the right thing. And more and more those companies are started by families and are started by as nonprofits that became drug developers because they have their finger on the pulse of what is actually clinically relevant, and so I think that's critical, at every level. There are companies that are doing it right. NewYorkBIO is certainly doing it right, and by leaning on organizations like Global Genes and NORD and NLORM for education. Education is so important. If you go to the NLORM website, there's an entire web, podcast series where it just stands there explaining everything, what is a chemical to all the way to antisense, platform, Effie Parks. My gosh, have you ever listened to one of Effie's podcasts? I think that it should be mandatory for every single company to listen to Effie Parks and that podcast, because, and the Two Disabled Dudes, big shout out to them, those two podcasts, just as
there's literally a podcast called Two Disabled Dudes.
Do you not know this podcast?
I didn't know that podcast.
I didn't either. I'm
Two Disabled Dudes,
now.
my friend Kyle and Sean, they it's an amazing podcast. And Two Disabled Dudes, and Effie's is called Once Upon a Gene, and it's just amazing. And they have lots of industry. If I beg and plead my incredible friends, I'm sure it wouldn't take much begging and pleading to have one of you guys on there, but There's there are these resources out there, and just as if you go into a preclinical meeting at a biotech, you have to be very familiar with the peer-reviewed literature around that. Well, you know what, you also have to be very, 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 very well prepared in reading patient stories and listening to these podcasts, because a peer-reviewed paper publication in wherever, neurology or anything like that, is really important. But you know what, you're gonna learn a lot more, and it's gonna complement that paper if you're reading stories on the Mighty, listening to Two Disabled Dudes and Once Upon a Gene, and it really needs to be viewed. It's the same value as the current publication. It's the same value. So do your homework before you go into one of those preclinical meetings or a protocol design meeting or any function in biotech. And if you're familiar with those, with that material, just as you are with every single peer-reviewed publication, you're doing your job.
Yeah. Well, and don't you think, so as I sit here, right, as a lawyer, I mean, I'm not a scientist. And I think for me, I could read the papers and, I read with a pen and get something. But what you're also saying is not only in companies, there are non-scientists that have to carry messages. Patients and parents and caregivers need to understand too, how to talk about these things. So what you're saying is there are lots of sources of information, and the podcast in particular are a really important piece for helping non-scientists learn how to educate themselves, but then to be able to carry a story forward, which I think is super important.
Yeah, and to quite literally hear the voice, right? We say the voice of you can literally hear you learn a lot by how somebody talks. Yeah. And Effie and Two Disabled Dudes and the Mighty and so many other, the Global Genes, all these. If you really want to hear the patient voice, think literally. Do whatever you can to hear the patient speak or the caregiver speak. It's so important. And I'll say, and I said this to our community on our community Facebook page, I said, hey, I'm fortunate enough to be on the New York Bio breakfast series. Can I who can I give a shout out to? So I am going to read here. So our superheroes and our families, who I'm just going to give a shout out to so you can hear their names, right? We have Liam, Casper, Nora, Kate, Turner, who I already mentioned. From the great state of New York, we have Jim, and our dear, dear friends, Sloan, and February is a especially difficult month for a few reasons, but we lost a girl named Eleonora from Sweden, who February 14th marks the day that she died. And I would be, not doing my job as a friend, a leader, or a community member if I didn't say that it's because of these selfless families who are still leaders in our community despite the unthinkable. And Evie and Evie's parents and Lassa's parents and Gia's parents and Eleanor's parents. These, you have a good community when after the unthinkable happens, these parents are still leaders, and that's why we have a remarkable community. It's because of parents like theirs.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the work you do for your community, for the broad community. I have been enriched by our conversation today, and I know that others have too.
Me too. I can't thank you enough for having me on, and to everybody who's listening. And it's just been an honor. It means the world to me. So thank you. Happy Rare Disease Day.
Happy Rare Disease Day. Thanks, Luke.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.